born the son of a black slave and a renegade French aristocrat in the French sugar island of Saint-Domingue, later Haiti, at the time when sugar was, to the world economy, a bit like what oil is today, or perhaps to stick with white powder, a bit like what cocaine was a few years ago. It was the most sought after and valuable commodity in the world. It was the thing men were willing to kill and be killed for. And as I say, his mother was a slave, his father was a sort of ne'er-do-well renegade aristocrat, and his uncle was a hard-working sugar and slave merchant who dealt his merchandise out of a little cove in the north of Haiti called Monte Cristo. There is quite a story there, but I think I will skip forward past his adventures on the island to the year 1775. And the father, who is, a renegade, a fugitive, has never earned a cent in his life, is still the eldest son. And he gets word that his father in Normandy has died and that there is a great fortune to be inherited if he can get himself from Haiti or from Saint-Domingue back to France. And to do so, he immediately takes a coach to Port-au-Prince, where he pawns our hero, his favorite son, into slavery to buy the ship ticket back to France. And I know he pawns him, not sells him, because part of my work is to find documentary evidence. I'm looking at stories. I tend to look at stories that haven't really been looked at before, where there isn't clear material in the archive on anything. And I was lucky enough to find the pawn ticket where he said, I have the right to buy my son back if I inherit this fortune, which indeed he does. And so in the year 1776, the man that I am following, studying, arrives in France, listed in a ship's manifest I found as the slave Alexander. Well, within a year, the slave Alexander is being trained at the finest fencing school in France, the avenues of Versailles, if you will, a place where you're trained not only in fencing, but in riding, manners, philosophy, languages. It is really the school of a young gentleman, the ideal place to be educated in the last years of the French monarchy. And he has inherited the title of Count, because his father has become a Marquis. And amazingly enough, this mixed-race teenager is being taught to fence at this school by the man who is the undisputed world, undefeated fencing master in the world, the best swordsman in Europe, who also, as fate would have it, had a black slave mother and a French aristocrat as a father. And his name was the Chevalier de Saint-Georges, and he has an amazing story in his own right. Well, so you have in the late 1770s these two black men somehow living this high life in the outskirts of Paris. But for our hero, there is the problem that he's living with his father, who not only sold him, but sold the family into slavery. And there's a lot of tension there, clearly. And after his education, he could have kept up this life of a nobleman, and I found some incredible records of his life in Paris in the 1780s, but he gives it all up after having a fight with his father in 1786, and he goes to the nearest army recruiting station and does something that no French aristocrat in their right mind would do, which is that he enlists, not as an officer, but as a simple private in the cavalry. But he is there's nothing simple about this man, and he is no simple private. They station him to this remote garrison town. He's part of the dragoons, really the sort of lowest branch of the cavalry, and he's sort of put out to sort of fight criminals and brigands along the borders. But there he hones his skills fighting duels with the other soldiers. And indeed becomes famous for being able to fight multiple duels in one day, a bit like, well, a character that we'll go into in a minute. The French Revolution breaks out in 1789, and this young man sees his chance. And with his fencing master, Saint-Georges, these guys form what they call the Legion of Free Americans. It's also called the Black Legion. It's known familiarly as the Black Legion, but the records call it the Legion of Free Americans. And why do they do that? Well, I would find that 200 years before Gene Kelly, effectively, there were Americans in Paris, but Americans in Paris were understood to be black or mixed-race men who had come from the Americas with at least one slave parent. But there were a few thousand of them living in the region of Paris, and they formed this volunteer corps to fight for the revolution. And they do this because Saint-Georges, and especially our hero, and I will, obviously I'm being a tease with his name, but our hero sees this as a chance to fight for racial freedom as much as the ideas of economic equality or other kinds of equality that the revolution stands for. Well, you know, he has a lot of adventures at the beginning of the French Revolution, but I'll stop with this one. He rides into a small town to save it from brigands. And there he meets a young woman, an innkeeper's daughter named Marie-Louise, who sees him. They fall madly in love. And I'll stop there because this tale that sounds like a 19th century romantic novel sounds like one perhaps very appropriately because the child of Marie-Louise and our hero, who has by this point taken the name, the nom de guerre, Alexandre Dumas, will be the novelist Alexandre Dumas, the author of the Count of Monte Cristo and the Three Musketeers and the Man in the Iron Mask. And really what I would find out is that all of Alexandre Dumas' famous novels were inspired by his father and written in a way as a way to write his father's exploits back into history. Because as I'll tell you in a minute, this man who started out life as a slave would rise to really the pinnacle of European society and then be completely erased until our own time, which is the reason why I have, you know, aside from any of my own abilities, been able to make a big splash, especially in France with my book, because everybody in France is sort of scratching their heads and saying, who knew?